Hey, everybody. I'd like to welcome you once again to Grace Life Bible Church, our YouTube channel here. Appreciate you tuning in as always. If you haven't already done so, if you consider subscribing and ringing the alarm bell as a way of staying current with the ministry, when we go live from our assembly building on Sunday morning, as well as when we create content for you here midweek, we'd certainly appreciate that. I'm excited to have a guest with me on the channel today, Alex. And Alex, I am going to have you pronounce for the audience how to say your last name because I don't want to butcher that.
It's Bojko.
Bojko. All right. We have Alex Bojko with us. And I met Alex last summer in July 2024 at the Grace School of Bible Summer Family Conference in Chicago. And we've struck up a friendship ever since then. And I would say more than a friendship, as we are partners in some research projects. And I want to welcome you to the channel today, Alex. And if you don't mind, if you would just give a brief introduction of yourself to the folks here at Grace Life Bible Church, I'd certainly appreciate that.
Yes, absolutely. So as Bryan mentioned, my name is Alex Bojko. I'm a 21-year-old college student living in Tampa, Florida, and I'm currently a junior at the University of South Florida, majoring in history. When it comes to just a brief testimony, I got saved when I was 17. I trusted Christ as my Savior then. I've been studying the King James Bible, rightly divided, since July of 2022. I do attend a Grace Church. It is But Now Fellowship with Pastor Kevin Hobbs. If you would like to learn more about that assembly, the website is butnowfellowship.com. But yes, as Bryan mentioned, we met at the Grace School of the Bible Summer Conference last year in July. We talked about some issues regarding the King James Bible, and he asked me to work with him then, and it's been a privilege and a joy ever since. So.
Yeah, I asked Alex to partner with me on some projects related to research for my class from This Generation Forever. And as he said, he's a history major. So Alex and I have a lot in common as far as interests and research ability and know-how, et cetera. And so he has proven to be an invaluable asset to what we're trying to accomplish here. So Alex, I just want to mention before we get into the main reason why we're going to be talking, I just want to mention the project that we've been working on now for a while, and I've described it here in the notes for the outline as the Herbert Catalog Project. And Alex, why don't you go ahead and just tell everybody what that Herbert's catalog is and how we're using it, and we'll start there. What do you have to say about that?
Sure. So way back, I would say in September of last year, and this was around the time when Bryan was doing work with the 1629 Cambridge folio surrounding Job 4:6. And as some of you may or may not know, that verse has kind of generated some controversy when it comes to certain sides of the King James only movement. And we found through, or Bryan mainly found through that, through some research, that the verse was in the Cambridge printings alone was not printed with uniformity. Then this led to, going into the 1630s, the London printings. We also found that they were not printed with uniformity. And so around this time, Bryan gave me a phone call and said, we need to pull every single edition of the King James Bible that we can find on the internet. And he knew, me being a student at USF, he knew I had access to certain databases that he did not have access to, which would be primarily early English books online and 18th century collections online. So he asked me if I would help him with that, and I said sure and absolutely. Now, Herbert's catalog, for those of you who don't know, was originally compiled in 1903. It was done by two individuals by the name of T.H. Darlow and H.F. Mole. And it initially contained the holdings of the British and Foreign Bible Society. It was expanded in 1968 by A.S. Herbert, and it includes those holdings that I just mentioned, but also holdings in the United States and the United Kingdom more broadly and more generally, different institutions in both of those countries. And it's a fairly comprehensive catalog of printed editions of the English Bible from 1526 to 1961. And I, as well as Bryan, we primarily use Herbert's catalog to, as I mentioned, go through the databases I just mentioned, early English books online, 18th century collections online, as well as archive.org and Google Books. pull those editions, see if they match with the catalog, and then put them into a large Dropbox file. And Bryan uses them for the class, his Sunday school class, as well as other videos.
So, Alex, so the audience knows, I'm trying to check right now. Do we know how many items we currently have in the Dropbox? We have a ton of printed editions that we've extracted from Herbert's catalog, very extensive, up through the 1670s and now into the 1680s. I would say we have at least 100 at this point. Would you agree?
Yeah, well over 100, well over 100. The 1670s and 1680s, as you just mentioned, I did a lot of work on those. A lot of the stuff beginning from 1611 has also been fairly complete. The 1650s, we're still working on those, but everything before that is fairly complete.
So just so the audience knows, what the Herbert's catalog does is it gives you a listing, and then you can go to these databases and check. And so Alex has been using his ability to check those things, and so it's been a great help to me, and I appreciate that. Now, Alex, what would you say to somebody who somewhere along the line we were talking about Job 4:6 back late last summer, early in the spring? Someone put out a piece that said that we were using heartless AIs to, in other words, that we're somehow not looking at real Bibles when we use the things extracted from early English books or these 17th, 18th century catalogs online. What would you say to that?
Yes, so I actually have an example. I'm going to share my screen because I'm going to share with the audience something that from my own research, now it's not something that necessarily pertains to the King James itself or, text and translation, but it's something that I do think is pertinent to how exactly everything is being done. So can you see the image in front of you?
I added it to the stage. There we go.
All right, so this right here, I'm going to tell everyone a story. So in my freshman year at USF, I had the opportunity to go to New York City and conduct archival research on a project. I received a grant from the Gilda Lehrman Institute of American History, and I went to three main institutions in New York City. One was the New York Public Library, the New York Historical Society, and the Morgan Library. When I was at the New York Public Library on my last day, I had the opportunity to work with microfilm. Okay, so what you have right here, this is a microfilm reel. Now, what happens is that when you go to an archive, you go to the reading room, which is where all the documents are, the primary source documents. The archivist, beforehand, you input what you want in a type of database catalog. The archivist will come and they will pull out what you requested. And if your items are on microfilm, they'll give you a box. So this is the box right here. This is, as you can see, the Horace Greeley papers. Horace Greeley was an influential newspaper editor of, the 1830s and 1840s in New York. And then you can see where it's from, the Manuscript and Archives Division. Okay. Now, what microfilm is, if you don't know, it's almost like a film reel, but when you look at microfilm, it has all these individual images on it. And it's a way to preserve a series of documents forever, in a sense. So, because sometimes when you have primary documents, now I'm looking at stuff from the 19th century here, but in cases like 17th century English books, early printed books, they tend to disintegrate over time. And so microfilm is kind of an easy way to store them. And you can sometimes store multiple documents, not just one. So in this case, it was multiple letters. So this was the box. Then in another image here, I don't know if you can you see this screen right here?
Got
Brian?
it. Yep, I got it.
So this right here is an example of what it looks like. Now I can share this necessarily without, typically sometimes what would happen, you'd have to show, some place where you got it, but for this, it's fine. I checked it, it's okay. You notice how when you look at it through the monitor, it's this stark black and white contrast, right? Now this gets the sender information for a letter, but you can see this stark black and white contrast. Now, why do I show that? I show that because this is what I see right here in early English books online. So I want everyone to notice here, this is what I look at. Now, this is a 1683, which we'll get into in a minute. But you can see right here, this also the stark black and white. They have this ruler here. I'm not quite sure what this is for. But when I look at something like this to me is emblematic of microfilm. So what typically ends up happening with these things is that what I look at are microfilm scans, right? So these are microfilm scans that are then put into databases. Now, I'm going to let you know right now, AI does not take the pictures. A lot of these
Amen.
microfilms, not all of them, but some of them, in fact, a lot of them, some of them are taken going all the way back to the 1940s. They don't tell you in early English books online, but a lot of them, from what I've read in other places, they are going back at least into the 1940s. Some are fairly recent and they may be done differently, but AI does not take the pictures on microfilm. What I will say about AI and databases, this information right here, like all of like the title and things like this, and if you go into, depending on how long this takes to load, sometimes this can take a little while, all of this data right here, which is what is called typically the metadata, which talks to you about what this is.
Yeah.
Sometimes it'll actually give you the Herbert catalog number, but not always. All of this is what is considered the metadata. I will admit that AI could possibly, when the scan is uploaded to the database, it is quite possible that AI could generate this. It's also quite possible sometimes that when the images is put up, yes, AI can go and maybe touch up a little bit of the imperfections here and there. But to make the claim that it's a heartless AI and we're getting it from an AI database is it's something that's kind of absurd on its face, and something that when you know how to work with these things is just not true. So
Yeah. So, Alex, can you leave that up there just quick?
oh
That
yes,
title page of that 1683. The point I want to add to what you just said, so that everybody understands that, is that what Alex is able to do is he's able to pull down the PDF. So we have PDFs of all these scans that we can now go through and search and look up the verses and the references. So we are actually looking at the real Bible, the actual texts from these different years and different printings. And so we're using Alex's access to these databases in conjunction with Herbert's catalog to be able to extract this. And before, just to close the loop on this, the goal here, I think you would agree, Alex, is that by the time we're done, we would like to have the most extensive collection of editions of the KJV possible for research and study purposes.
absolutely. Yeah, that is the goal. And I'll mention just one brief little thing on that. I myself, when I do it, I don't go off of the metadata alone. Like Bryan said, I download the edition, and with Herbert, I check it. I know how to count the page signatures and all that. So it's very dangerous to just go and check metadata. Google Books as well, which is kind of a more public access type of, it's not necessarily a database, but it's something kind of like this. It's notorious for getting the metadata, the descriptions kind of wrong. So we
Okay.
always check these things just to make sure. So
Yeah, that's good. So leave that up there, Alex. What Alex has up there is the title page of a 1683 Cambridge edition. Okay. And I
yeah,
want to say a few things about this. This is kind of moving into our second point. What we have discovered in my From This Generation Forever class, going back to lesson 249, we began a discussion of the editorial work of F.S. Parris. And I did a lesson and I was covering some points that Gordon Campbell talks about in his book, Bible, the story of the King James Version, 1611 to 2011. And he had different categories of the editorial changes of Parris. And I had taken screenshots and I was showing in lesson 249, the work of Parris. Well, in between, the week in between me teaching lesson 249 and when I was going to teach lesson 250, which would have been the next lesson, Christopher Yetzer, a friend of mine and missionary in Italy, reached out to me. He watched lesson 249 and he reached out to me with some interesting data about this Cambridge 1683 Quarto edition that uh, Gordon Campbell and David Norton and now Lawrence Vance, these guys who have done a lot of work on the history of the text, didn't look at what I'm calling these lesser editions. Okay. And so what this turned out is some interesting research, and this is going to be precursory to what Alex is going to get into here in a minute. But what we discovered through Christopher's help and then through building on what Christopher did is that Christopher produced a spreadsheet listing all the examples of changes attributed to Parris by David Norton in his book, A Textual History of the King James Bible, okay? And what we discovered is that 63 of the examples that were contained in the list, that of the 63 examples contained in the list, 23 of them, or 36.5%, had already been edited before Parris in this 1683 Cambridge Quarto. And then moving forward in time, in lesson 252, I covered some things related to changes in you and ye. All this, if anyone's interested in this information, we'd be happy to direct you to where that you can get it in these lessons. But what we saw were 193 changes, you changes, okay? So let me just put this up here on the screen quick, Alex. I'm going to try to do this fast. I know we have other things we want to get to, but I think it's important for people to see what we're talking about here. So I'm going to add that to the stage. So right here, okay? So recall from above that 193 or 94.6% of the 204 UE changes cataloged by Vance in Chapter 3, that would be Chapter 3 of his book, were ascribed to the 1762 and 1769 folio editions of Cambridge and Oxford, respectively. Of these 193 changes, my research uncovered 132 of them, or 68.3% of them, had already been made in the 1683 Cambridge Quarto edition, H780. This is a staggeringly high number of edits that were not supposed to have been made until nearly 80 years later. So what we found here, Alex, was a major breakthrough in understanding the history of the text. And that should set you up then to kind of present what you want to present moving forward. So let me stop sharing. I'm going to remove this, and then you go ahead and share your screen and take us through how you believe you discovered who the editor of this 1683 Cambridge Quarto edition was.
All right. So, can we see the notes?
Yes.
Okay. So, as Bryan mentioned, Christopher Yetzer found this important edition. This was first around December of last year, and ever since then I was interested in it. And about 2 weeks ago, last month, I did a basic Google search on the 1683 Cambridge Quarto, and I came across a photograph of the English Scholarly Journal Notes and Queries. Now, full disclosure, we are going to make these notes public, and there are links here. So if you would like to see the images of what we are talking about, you can.
Alex, can you pinch your fingers and make that zoom in a little bit on that document so we can see it a little bit better?
Is that good?
That's way better. Go ahead.
Okay, so I came across this Notes and Queries article from 1903, and it quoted Scrivener's The Authorized Edition of the English Bible, 1611, its subsequent reprints and modern representatives. I then proceeded to find the whole 1903 issue of Notes and Queries through HathiTrust, which is another type of database. And I discovered the article titled Dr. Anthony Scattergood's Bible. And the article starts by quoting Scrivener. And Scrivener writes here, of the Bibles published during the latter part of the 17th century, that of Hills and Field, small 8vo, this means octavo, London, 1660, is remarkable for certain additions of the original marginal notes of 1611, subsequently improved upon in a Cambridge Quarto of 1682-3, see section 2, bearing the name of John Hayes, the university printer, who had previously put forth a well-known edition in 1677. This is most likely H736, which is an edition we're going to talk about in this set of notes. The later of Hayes's 2 contains a great number of fresh textual references, the reputed work of Dr. Anthony Scattergood, and mostly taken from his Bible, also published at Cambridge in 1678. So this was the first time I heard the name Dr. Anthony Scattergood. And obviously, in the above quotation, Scrivener's main observation concerns the increase of textual references, which are cross-references in the margin of the text. I will use throughout this document textual references and cross-references interchangeably, but just know that that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about cross-references. And he's talking about the increase of those from the 1677 Cambridge to the 1682/83 Cambridge. Bernard P. Scattergood, the writer of the Notes and Queries article, and he's most likely a relative of Anthony Scattergood. He then goes on to cite the introduction to the English Hexapla, which provides more insight into the 1682/83 Quarto in question. I was not able to find the original source when it comes to the Hexapla, so I quoted it exactly like it was in the article. So, quote, the writer of the introduction to Baxter's English Hexapla, speaking of errors which had crept into the editions of the AV, published in such rapid succession after its first issue, says some of these were very important and others extremely ludicrous, so that after the lapse of time, a careful correction of the current editions became indispensably necessary. This important task was first executed by Dr. Scattergood in 1683. Now, we see here with Scrivener, the increase in the references. We see here with the Hexapla, the sense that there's errors and Scattergood corrected them. Now, to check the veracity of these above claims, I first needed to learn more about Anthony Scattergood. I needed to check the contents of the Cambridge Quarto editions from 1677 to 1683, along with every edition of the King James Bible that I could find from 1670 to 1683, from the 5 major publishers of the text at the time, which would be Amsterdam, Cambridge, Edinburgh, London, and Oxford.
Yeah.
So
just to interject there. So what Alex is doing here, just for the audience, is he's corroborating evidence. Okay. He's stacking evidence. He finds a piece, he finds another piece, he starts stacking evidence so that he can build an argument of cumulative effect. This is absolute textbook how you want to make historical arguments. So Alex, good on you. Continue, please.
Thank you. So I'm first going to address the issue of the textual references and the increase of those. Again, those are the cross references. So the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, which is a source that if you want to learn more about some of the printers or publishers or people who did things with the text, this is kind of where you go. It's good for other things, but for what we're doing, it's good too. It contains an entry for Anthony Scattergood and includes the following concerning his work on Bibles printed at Cambridge. He, talking about Anthony Scattergood, was also credited with increasing by some thousands of words the parallel texts, again, cross-references, cited in Cambridge Bibles printed by John Hayes. But the sole copy of the first edition, dated or misdated 1678, said to contain the additional citations, is no longer in Lambeth Palace Library. If that edition never actually existed, Scattergood would have had to have concluded either the editions of 1677, beginning at Psalm 102:25 beside Genesis 1:1, or those of 1683, beginning in John 1:1, or perhaps both. Now, I'm going to just from the beginning deal with this issue of 1678. So this is a little bit after, it's a little bit later in the document, but I want to just show this little piece of evidence right here. So this is something from John Lewis's A Complete History of the Several Translations of the Holy Bible from 1739. And there's this one witness that says, in 1678, was this Bible published at Cambridge by the university printer J. Hayes, with the addition of many parallel texts by Anthony Scattergood, D.D. Rector of Woolwich and Everton, Northamptonshire. So my personal belief of the 1678, which was most likely it was a folio or a quarto, most likely it was a folio, I believe that it did exist. I do believe that a 1678 in some form existed. I just believe there was not a lot of them printed. All right. So sometimes, because when you look at what we're talking about, sometimes because there's not a lot of information on this, so they'll say it either existed, it may not have existed. I believe that it did exist, just to put that out there. But to understand Scattergood's work on the text, I pulled as many editions of the King James as I could from the database Early English Books Online, since when it comes to this period that we're looking at in the 1680s and it's in the 1670s and the 1680s, it's fairly comprehensive. So I started in 1670 and ended in 1683 to follow as close as possible John Hayes's tenure as printer for Cambridge University Press, which goes from 1669 to 1680. And I pulled all of the folios. It could be the major editions, and all the lesser editions. It could be your quartos, your octavos, your duodecimos, what have you. And again, this was from the 5 printers that I already mentioned: Amsterdam, Cambridge, Edinburgh, London, and Oxford. Yeah. Now, here is what I found. So to check the claim, I looked at the references that increased from the 1677 to the 1683. I checked 3 places. They're all in the book of Genesis. Genesis 1:1, Genesis 3:1, and Genesis 3:14. Now, Cambridge University Press was the only one, in my whole analysis that I did, it was the only one to add cross-references to the text for the verses mentioned above. And this started in 1677. Now, prior to 1677, for including Cambridge, Edinburgh, London, and Oxford, the cross-references were as follows. So this would be this section right here. And full disclosure, the Amsterdam editions were not included in this just because they contained notes from the Geneva Bible. So that would kind of do some things. So they were not included. But we see here in Genesis 1:1, the references would be Psalm 33:6, Psalm 136:5, Acts 14:15, Acts 17:24, and Hebrews 11:3. All right. In Genesis 3:1, no cross references. In Genesis 3:14, no cross references. Okay. So this would have been the standard prior to 1677.
Yep.
The 1677, and let me see, maybe I can do 2 pages here so that everyone can see what we're looking at here, because sometimes it can get a little small. So starting in 1677, H736, which is here on the right, Genesis 1:1, we start to see some changes. Psalm 33:6, okay, that's there. Psalm 102:25, that's added. Psalm 136:5, okay, that's been there. Psalm 146:6, you can barely see, but the 6 is there.
Yep.
That's been added. Then we have Isaiah 44:24, Jeremiah 10:12, Jeremiah 51:15, Zechariah 12:1, and then the rest of the references, Acts 14:15, Acts 17:24, Hebrews 11:3. That's always been there. So we have 6 cross references added to Genesis 1:1 alone in 1677.
Yep.
In Genesis 3:1 right here, we do not have any references added. And then right at the bottom, this is Genesis 3:14. You can see right here, Isaiah 65:25 is added right there. We then go to the 1682. This is A768. And more changes done to the references. In Genesis 1:1, we see here that John 1:1 is added. We see here that Psalm 89, verses 11 through 12, that's added. And none of the references that we see in the 1677, they're not there. They've been taken out. We have here Psalms 33:6, that's there. Psalm 136:5 is there. Acts 14:15, Acts 17. So the references that were in the pre-1677, they're in here. Now, kind of complicate things a little bit here. Sometimes this can get a little confusing with all these additions here. On early English, yep. Do you have anything?
No, just blow your mind. Anyone who criticizes this is so tedious to sit here and compare and have the screens open and try to keep it all straight. You're doing a fine job. Go ahead.
So in Early English Books Online, I found a Cambridge Quarto with the general title page dated 1682. The New Testament is dated 1683. In it, the cross-references for Genesis 1:1 in the 1677 Quarto and the 1682 Cambridge Quarto, they are combined. Okay? And the image of that is right here, and I'll explain it in a minute. Furthermore, Genesis 3:1 cross-references Matthew 10:16, 2 Corinthians 11:3, And Genesis 3:14 includes an additional cross-reference to Micah 7:17. Now, this is in addition to the 1683 Cambridge Quarto found by Christopher Yetzer. So, this is the 1683 Cambridge Quarto H783. One thing I will mention is that this was initially H780. When I was doing some stuff on early English books online, I found that it was, after counting some things with regards to the page signatures, and the page signatures, there are these letters followed by a number that are on the bottom of the text that the printers used to lay the type when it came to bounding the actual Bible. When I counted those, I found that the signatures for H783 and H780, they didn't match. And I found out that the one Christopher Yetzer found, it matched H783. We don't necessarily have time to go through that, but that is what I concluded. Then there's the 1683 Cambridge Quarto with the 1683 New Testament title. So you can see here we got John 1:1, Psalm 89 11 through 12 right here with my cursor, exactly as it was in the 1682. We see Psalm 33:6 from the pre 1677 Bibles, right? And we got 102:25 and 146. So you see that this is the combined work here. All right. So we're going back to the single page. Now, David Norton, who we've talked a lot about, we've kind of scrutinized him a little bit, but we've also shown him some grace, given myself looking and doing this type of work. It's not easy to do, and it's certainly not something that you do like that in the pink. But David Norton, in Textual History of the King James Bible, he mentions the increased number of references in the 1678 in the 1677 and 1678 Cambridge editions. However, there is no mention whatsoever of the 1682 and 1683 nor Anthony Scattergood. So this is from
right.
So the marginal notes and references were further developed under the AGGIs, that's the protection or supervision of field successor as Cambridge printer John Hayes in 1677 and 1678. Development of the marginal material was a sensible commercial move. James I's aversion to the Geneva Notes had been influential in making the King James Bible a version free of explanatory annotation, but there was and still is a strong popular desire for such notes. And then note 39, it's just essentially quoting Scrivener, like I mentioned in the first page of the document. And the 1677 edition is A736, but Herbert does not record a 1678 edition. Now, this is true. We don't have the 1678. We don't have it. It's not digitized. I don't know where it is. If someone knows where it is, let me know. But
let us know. Yes,
we don't know where it is, so we can't use that. But back to this. Norton's description is not wholly accurate. He does not go beyond the work of Scrivener to see if any additional changes have been made to the text. Instead, he takes Scrivener at his word and does not mention the other places Scrivener mentions of 1683. Now, this is the fifth footnote right here. 82 to 92 is where he mentions it. There's other places in the authorized edition where Scrivener does mention it, but it mainly revolves around changes in the punctuation and changes in the text of the marginal notes and cross references. So he's not talking about the wholesale editorial change or things like this. So Norton, he does accurately mention the increase of textual references in the 1677 Cambridge Quarto. However, more references were added and taken out in the 1682 Cambridge Quarto. Furthermore, he does not mention the 1683 Cambridge Quarto, H783, which includes the combined work of the 1677 and 1682 Cambridge Quartos. And
so Alex, would it be fair to say that Norton is Scrivener reliant? He's just relying on what Scrivener said, and he didn't go back to check that himself. He just assumes, rightly or in this case probably wrongly, that Scrivener had all the information, and so he doesn't think he needs to check.
That's correct. I would say so, definitely.
And I would say he's not the only one in the greater conversation related to the printed history of the King James text who is Scrivener reliant, who never checked any of the stuff that we're covering right now.
Correct. Yes, absolutely. So we continue on here to David McKitterick, who he wrote a 3-volume work titled The History of Cambridge University Press, and this is from his first volume, where he's going to describe the state of Cambridge University Press in terms of Bible printing. So, quote, although Hayes continued to print Bibles until 1683, the reestablishment of the King's printers, the strength of the Dutch trade in printing English Bibles, the rapid development of the Oxford Bible Press after 1679, even in the face of the King's printers, and the consequent slump in prices made continuance at Cambridge unrealistic. Nor was the market uniformly strong. It was a measure of the holds taken in what was inevitably rather a slow market, since Kirkers did not re-equip frequently, and the number of private buyers was severely limited. Now, based on this information, we're going to look at some title pages now from the 1682, 1683 Cambridge Quartos, and we're going to compare them with the 1683. So I want the audience to see this here. This is a 1673 Cambridge Quarto 8712. Notice the 3 here. The top of the 3 is straight, then it starts to curve. 8768, this was the same 8768 that was used to do the cross-reference analysis a little while ago. Notice this is curved. Typical shape of a 2, it's curved. Okay, now keep that in mind when we look at a 1683, these two 1683s. This is 8780. Notice, you can see it.
The 3s don't look the same as the other one.
Right. This is the 2. And then this tail for the 3 is done here. And it's also the same here in 8783. So you see the 2, and then the tail for the 3 starts to go down here. So notice the style of the 3 in the 1683 Cambridge Quarto is curved, like the 2 in the 1682 Cambridge Quarto, while the 3 in the 1673 Cambridge Quarto is straighter. The difference in style proves that the date was altered from 1682 to 1683. Now, this is going to become important because what I was able to find on early English books online, we have the 1677 Cambridge Quarto, Roman font, A736, has a 1677 New Testament title page. Okay, pretty standard. We then have a 1682 Cambridge Quarto with a 1680 New Testament title page. So we can see here we have something that's mixed. Now, I didn't check the references for the 1680 New Testament. It's quite possible they may be changed, they may not be. I don't know. We then have these 1682 Cambridge Quarto in Roman font with a 1683 New Testament title page. Now, this one, like I mentioned in the couple pages, at the top of the document, this includes edits from the 1683 Cambridge Quarto edition 8783. They're exactly the same here. We then have 8780, which has a New Testament title page of 1680. And based on what I've been able to look at, most likely it is a 1682 with an altered date of a 1683. And it's this one right here. We then go on to the next 8780, and Herbert's catalog does list this one. This has a New Testament from 1666. There are no changes, nothing like that. And it has a text block most likely from the 1660s. Most likely it's from either 8683 or 697. When you take a look at the pages of this, the type is rather smushed. It's like almost touching. So, and it was common of these editions. So then we have a 1683 Cambridge Quarto with a 1683 New Testament title page. So what does all this mean? This means that the Cambridge Quartos of 1677 through 1683 were issued in altered states. It is safe to assume that the 1683 Cambridge Quarto represents the complete work of Anthony Scattergood, which began in 1677. And I attribute the altered states of the title pages and the text to Cambridge's declining prominence in the Bible market and the lack of need to print new editions of the Bible after 1683. And so we need to look at the work of Scattergood similar to the work of Parris. Parris's work was started in 1743. Some changes were done in the middle. 1762 is set to represent his culmination. I say we need to look at Scattergood in the same way. His work starts in 1677. It's going to continue a little bit in 1682, 1683. We could consider it, based on the information that we have, as the culmination. So now we're going to get into the fun stuff, which is the editorial work done to the text. So we've talked about the cross references. Now we need to talk about the editorial work that's been done. So to determine this, Christopher Yetzer, as mentioned previously, he did a spreadsheet where he looked at the edits that Norton ascribed to the work of Parris in 1762. This was in the main text of Textual History of the King James Bible. And he's also said that it may or may not include examples that were in Appendix 8 in the back of the book. Okay. Now, I went through Appendix 8 and I found these three: Deuteronomy 23:25, Romans 4:12, and James 2:16. Now, with this table right here, I may not be necessarily the best way to organize this, but I'll explain kind of what this is. So these columns right here, these first five, these are the main five printers of the text, right? And if there is an addition in these columns, this means that this addition has the change to the verse. Okay, that's what it means. And then this no change column right here means that there were no changes done to the verse. Okay, so these printers did not change anything when it comes to the verse. Okay. We see with Deuteronomy 23:25, from neighbors plural to neighbors singular. Again, this does not change substantively, doctrinally, the meaning of the text. If you read verses 24 and 25, neighbors is still being talked about. And if it's plural, if it's singular, then again, we're still talking about neighbors here. The doctrine is not changed, but it is an editorial change from plural to singular.
Made in 1677, I might add.
Yeah, yeah, and it was first done in the 1677 and then 1683. Now, there's a footnote that I have here. I want to just read this because this is interesting. In Appendix 8 of Textual History, Norton ascribes the change from neighbors plural to neighbors singular as first appearing in Blaney's 1769 edition. So the change that, he ascribes to Blaney, we see in 1677. Okay, so the first occurrence of this was in the 1677 and in the 1683 Cambridge Quartos. Now, this is as far as we know at this time. Something could happen and something could change here, but this is what we know. So in the 1762 Cambridge Quarto, it departs from the reading of Deuteronomy 23:25 in the 1677 and 1683, and instead edits the verse to read neighbors apostrophe S. So Blaney in 1769 was following the editorial work completed in 1677 and 1683. Okay, and we can get more into that, but it's not the point of this video. So
okay. I think it's important though, just to clarify what you're saying for the listeners. Okay, what you're saying is that Norton ascribes a change to 1769 that actually happened in 1677 for the first time.
Exactly.
And the reason why Norton did that is because he was only looking at the large folio editions. He did not look at the lesser editions or the smaller sized editions. And so there's data that is escaping the gaze of these men. I try to be charitable and gracious with them, but they're not looking at all of the things that you need to be looking at. And the only way to know is to look at all the ones that you clearly looked at.
Exactly. Yes, you need to look at everything to see what exactly they did. We have here Romans 4:12. The only change here is but who also walk. So 1677 and 1683, we have this change here, and we have all these additions starting in 1670 from Amsterdam, Cambridge, Edinburgh, London, Oxford, that they don't change it. We only see it, the first change done in 1677. James 2:16. This is an issue with ye in the italics. So be you warmed and filled to be ye warmed and be ye filled. Now in the 1670s with London, we start to see them changing the text to be ye. So the first part, be ye warmed, that's what they change it to. But they don't change the second part. 1677, we see the change, be ye warmed and be ye filled. Okay, we start to see that, and then also 1683. So, but there's no italics there, but the construction is there. Now, some of the variants listed in Christopher Yetzer's spreadsheet and in my analysis, they do originate in the 1677. However, there are some that are original to the 1683 Cambridge Quarto. Matthew 16:16 is an example. Now, based on this information, again, we need to look at Scattergood's work as being done in stages based on this, and the 1683 being the culmination of what was done in 1677. Now, this piece of information is, in my mind, fascinating, what I'm about to share. In 1914, John S. Kenyon, who was an American linguist of the 20th century, he wrote an article for the academic journal PMLA, and it was titled Ye and You in the King James Version. In it, he provides commentary on the changes between ye and you in the King James editions and mentions the 1683 Cambridge Quarto. And he writes, no considerable changes were made in the London and Oxford editions before 1751, and those made were mainly in the New Testament. On the other hand, I found that the first changes on a large scale appear in a Cambridge Quarto of 1683. John
Bingo.
Lewis, in his History of the English Translation of the Bible, mentions an important Cambridge folio of 1678, edited by Dr. Anthony Scattergood, a Cambridge scholar. This edition is not known to be extant, but it is believed to be represented by a Cambridge Quarto of 1683. As there appears to be but one Cambridge Quarto of 1683, now that's kind of debatable what I show you, but we'll go with it for this. It is probable that we are to attribute Dr. Scattergood the first extensive changes from U to Ye in our modern Bibles.
Yep, and that tracks with the evidence from my lesson on lesson 253.
Exactly.
Yep.
In the Oxford and London edition, some dozen of Dr. Scattergood's changes first appear in the 1743 Oxford Folio, 16 in the 1751 London Folio, 35 in a 1753 London Folio. In a 1761 London Quarto appear 65 changes not before found in Oxford or London editions, but found in previous Cambridge editions. On the whole, then, the Cambridge editors are chiefly responsible for the change, as it did not greatly affect the Oxford or London Bibles till it was substantially completed in the Cambridge editions.
Yeah.
So, there is more. In 1697, Anthony Scattergood's entire library was sold at auction. And among the many theological books in his library, one of them was a 1683 Cambridge Quarto Bible. So you see the Bible in English.
Yeah, that's
Cambridge
amazing.
Quarto, 1683. So why would he keep it if he was just interested in the textual references? I would say, personally, this shows he cared about his editorial work to the text.
Yes. Yep. I would agree.
Additionally, there is more evidence to show, if you look at the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography entry, it goes through, he did a lot of editorial work to different things, different theological publications. But this one, we see here his involvement in the fourth edition of Francis Gouldman's A Copious Dictionary in 1678. So we see here, and in this fourth edition, there are many thousands of words more added by the skills and pains of Dr. Scattergood. So he clearly had the etymological skills, lexicographical skills, linguistic skills to be able to do the work on the text that we see.
Yes. Good evidence.
So finally, there is more than enough evidence to prove that Dr. Scattergood edited the textual references of 1677 and the 1683 Cambridge Quartos, as well as the text itself. Now, the King James only movement has been silent on Scattergood and his work on the text, with the exception of a ministry titled Keys of the Bible, which is a ministry of Old Paths Baptist Church in Blue Springs, Missouri. In a paper titled 20 Lies About the King James 1611 Authorized Version, the unnamed author provides the following inaccurate statement on Scattergood and provides no citation for where he got his information. So the author writes, the 1683 from Cambridge scholar Dr. Scattergood, who added the additions of parallel text, notes running alongside the text, but never changed the text. Dr. Anthony Scattergood added 7,250 marker reference notes in 1683. This is inaccurate because he did edit the text.
He did edit the text.
He did edit the text. So this is not accurate, which that's not surprising given what we've seen before. But in light of these findings, the thought of many in the King James only movement that the only additions of the text were done in 1611, 1629, 1638, and 1762, and 1769 needs revision. Scattergood's editions of 1677, 1682, and 1683 need to be included in this paradigm to accord with the facts.
Yes.
Furthermore, the text of the King James Bible was not printed with uniformity throughout the presses of Amsterdam, Cambridge, Edinburgh, London, and Oxford. Therefore, it is not wise to ascribe a specific reading to a specific edition without checking all of them. All of the editorial changes do not impact the doctrinal meaning of the text and are simply refinements to the text of the King James Bible. this is a major breakthrough when it comes to the work of the text. I think that, regardless of, what anyone, kind of thinks about it, I think this is definitely a major breakthrough in our understanding of the text. Not much has been known about Scattergood before, and so we're really, kind of making it known to people that, this work was done on this edition. We can prove that it was done, and, we'll see what people do with it, after this.
So yeah, Alex, just to sort of follow up on all that you've said there, I mean, that's excellent historical research, and I think it does demonstrate for beyond doubt that Scattergood is for sure adding to the marginalia with the cross references, and he's also impacting the text. So if you scroll back up to that quote from Old Path Ministry there, it's just another example of King James only argumentation, not according with the facts. And we see this all the time as we've done this research. Now, this doesn't cancel out or falsify my belief that the King James Bible is God's word for English-speaking people. But what it does do is it brings into clear view the fact that the text was not being printed with uniformity in London, Oxford, Cambridge, Edinburgh, Amsterdam, and the idea that it is just simply not true. And so if people are going to adopt the assumption that all of this has to be done with verbatim identicality, and that you have to have the exact words in the exact order uniformly across every edition, it's just not true. I wish it was true. It'd be nice if it was true. It'd be convenient if it was true, but it's just not true. And so too many people who have commented on this, who comes to mind is David Reagan in his piece, The Myth of Early Revision. His whole pamphlet is written, and it is Scrivener reliant. He never goes and looks at any of the editions for himself. And then what happens, Alex, in our day is people read Reagan's work, they take that as authoritative, and they don't see any reason to do any of the extra steps. Now, I think you'll agree, the stuff that we've done, the stuff that you've done here is hard, dogged research work.
It is.
To
absolutely.
To mine that stuff out and to put it together. It takes hard work. And so so some within the King James only establishment, they want to point fingers very quickly on work that they haven't done. And it's very troubling and upsetting that that's the state of the affairs that we're in right now. But I, for one, I'm not willing to keep saying and repeating talking points that just simply aren't true, because to defend the truth, the cause of truth is not aided by factually inaccurate information.
I agree.
And you've moved the ball. You've taken what Christopher did. You've taken what I've added to what Christopher did, and now you've moved it, a step further in understanding. And that's exactly why I love what we're doing, because it's the body of Christ working together to further the understanding and advance the information and come to better understandings of the historical data and information and what actually happened.
Amen.
So, Alex, I've enjoyed having you on. I'm hoping this will just be the first of many more to come. Before we go, though, Alex, I might ask if I could impose upon you to share the gospel with the audience, if you don't mind.
I wouldn't mind at all, Bryan. Most important thing to realize about the gospel, son, of anything that you do, the Bible says that there's none that doeth good, no, not one. And it talks about very clearly that salvation is not by what you do. God is a standard of righteousness to get into heaven, and none of us meet it in our own outward carnal flesh. But God sent his son, the Lord Jesus Christ. He lived a perfect sinless life for you and for me. And he died on the cross of Calvary for your sins, was buried, and rose again the third day, according to the scriptures. And all you got to do to be saved is just believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and thou shalt be saved. Believe that his death, burial, and resurrection was fully sufficient for full payment of your sin debt. Now is the day of salvation. Don't wait another minute. Trust Jesus Christ today before it is too late.
Amen. Thanks, Alex. And I just want to say again before we sign off that I have enjoyed working with you immensely, and I think we have a bright future of further research and engagement in historical things in front of us. A lot more work needs to be done still, and I appreciate you being involved in it with me.
It's been a pleasure to work with you as well, Bryan.
All right, everybody. Appreciate your attention. Thanks for listening and tuning in, and we will see you next time.